When Roman first gets it in 2010, it's at 32 cents. When I first get it in 2013, it's $42. Bitcoin, why they hate it, is it makes it a lot harder to find your assets. It makes it harder to seize your assets. They're obsessed with control. And the number one way to control you is to...
Could owning Bitcoin make me a criminal? Like, that's a very real thing that people worry about.
I've been doing these cases now for 14 years. The first thing I will tell you is that if you think that the government doesn't go after innocent people and convict them, you're a fool. I think you're an idiot. That usually those people have zero actual experience with what this machine is like. And once you get some experience with this machine, you will understand why we actually need something like Bitcoin.
He ended up making this purchase of Bitcoin, and then it started to grow like right away, right? The way he framed it to us, and he called it, it was like having a magic wallet that no matter how much I spent out of it, the value just kept going up.
Mr. Mike Hazard, Tor Ekeland, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me here today and enlightening us on some topics that are, hard to talk about at times, but things that Bitcoiners need to know, freedom, privacy advocates need to know and need to be caught up to speed on. So I really, really appreciate you guys having the time to cut out to spend with us here today. Thanks, boys.
Oh, it's good to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, good to be here.
Yes.
Likewise.
So really quick, why don't we start with you, Tor, and kind of just give a quick synopsis of your bio and what you've been working on, just the way people can get caught up to speed a little bit here.
Yeah, my name's Tor Ekeland. It's my real name. Both my parents were from Norway, if you're wondering if I changed my name to be a computer lawyer. I have been representing people accused of computer crime by the United States government and other agencies since roughly 2011. I think we are the first law firm in the world, if not the first, one of the first to take Bitcoin as a form of payment. Back in January 2013, we were trying to raise money for a case, and somebody said, "Hey, do you take Bitcoin?" I said, "What's Bitcoin?" They said, "It's money." And I said, "Yeah, I take it." So we've been in the Bitcoin space a while. We just recently took on our first big Bitcoin case, United States v. Roman Sterlingov, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But long story short, I've been representing people accused of computer crimes for, what is it now, 14 years.
I think it's incredible. Michael, why don't you give your background?
Yeah, sounds good. So I started working with Tor in, 2021. It's going on 5 years now. And, when I joined the firm, we were mainly representing hackers and people who were accused under the CFAA. And with Roman's case, it really took a turn towards representing more of these Bitcoin cases. We see more and more of those every day, particularly under the last administration. And what happens when these cases come into federal courts is the defendants get railroaded. And that's the story what happened to Roman Sterlingov, because best we can tell, he's innocent of everything that he's been accused and now convicted of. And there's somebody who's been wrongfully incarcerated based on sloppy digital forensics.
And that's what honestly is scary about all the new Bitcoin forensics and everything in this space, is that they're convicting people like Roman was convicted without any eyewitnesses who actually saw them doing anything, without any, in Roman's case, any direct evidence. Like they seized all his computers, right, when they arrested him, and there was no evidence of him on these computers of running Bitcoin fog. And for those of you not familiar with Roman's case, he was basically convicted of running a Bitcoin mixer, which sort of hides the source of your funds, makes them untraceable.
There's legitimate privacy uses for a mixer. That was one of the main things that came out early in the case, was that people who use Bitcoin are allowed to seek and try to get financial privacy on the blockchain. It's commonly misunderstood that Bitcoin is private. It's pseudonymous. You're identified by a number, which is your wallet address. But there's real world things that can be tied or linked to that pseudonymous account that allow the person behind a particular wallet to be exposed. And when that happens, people are at risk of things called wrench attacks. So if somebody knows that you got a large holding of Bitcoin and they want to rob you from it, they'll show up at your hotel room with a wrench and basically hit you until you give up your private keys. And that's why people seek out financial privacy on the blockchain. And that's what a mixer does. And early on in our case, the judge in Roman's case said that mixing, if done for personal privacy reasons, is legal. So I think that's really an important thing that came out of this case. One of the first things that came out of it.
Yeah, and either of you guys can take this. I mean, this is something that, again, I don't think a lot of Bitcoiners, just from a macro level, and maybe just people that are coming into the Bitcoin world or sound money or whatever, why is it, the world we live in says, hey, if the government's coming after you, or, then you've done something wrong, number one. And it's kind of like this world that we live in of like guilty till proven innocent, which is really opposite, right? Individuals are innocent until proven guilty. Government's guilty until proven innocent. And that's something we've got completely flipped backwards. And so I would love just one of you to kind of explain the importance of just privacy in transactions. And it's like this 4-letter word that the average person is just like, well, if you're being private, then there must be something wrong. You must be doing something bad. So I would love one of you to kind of explain, the beauty and the essence of that privacy.
Sure. Like I said, I've been doing these cases now for about 14 years. And the first thing I will tell you is that if you think that the government doesn't go after innocent people and convict them, you're a fool. You're just a naive fool who has believed everything you've been told since maybe you were in 6th grade. And you think that the government is some sort of virtuous entity that's there to protect you. And one of the things I hear from a lot of my clients is, what the hell is going on here? Like, I didn't do this, or this is crazy what they're doing. And so this notion that the government is some sort of virtuous entity that doesn't make mistakes and is infallible is just naive and foolish. And if you want sort of an op-ed commentary on that, read the Bill of Rights in America. Because the Bill of Rights, the United States Constitution, the philosophy is not trust the government. They were well aware of the government's abuses. And if you think somehow that that's magically changed in the last 250 so years, I think you're an idiot.
Yeah, and it makes me think, and we were talking offline briefly about this, but it's one of the things that keeps people from Bitcoin, and we can get into some of this other stuff in a little bit, like some of the objections people have of like, did the government create Bitcoin and things, the CIA or the NSA, but I think there's a lot of people that, because you hear it, I mean, over time, over the last 10 years of myself is like, could owning Bitcoin make me a criminal? Like, that's a very real thing that people worry about. And so what is the average person facing? And they see stuff like this and are like, hey, what the hell? Like, this is why I'm staying away from this stuff. Like, you guys are kind of crazy.
Yeah, well, you brought up a really good point. Yeah, you brought up a really good point early on when you were mentioning that there are instances where, the government is prosecuting innocent people and they don't get the benefit of that innocent till proven guilty concept that we all know is true, right? And at one point in Roman's case, we had the government come up and say to us, no, we got to prove him innocent. We had to bring it up in front of the judge to say, hey, look, this isn't the standard here. It never has been, it never was, and it never will be. Yet that's pretty much how Roman's case played out. And what happened there was they had this tracing done by a private company called Chainalysis. And Chainalysis seems to be a revolving door between the prosecutors. Once they leave DOJ, they go work for Chainalysis. And Chainalysis is hiring people who were working on the case to basically secure their interest with the United States government. And they used this case to legitimize their blockchain tracing. And we attacked it at every point we could. And still, it was almost as though we were having to prove Roman's innocence rather than innocence being assumed upon Roman. And
that goes back to what you were saying before, was like, there's this presumption that the government would never be going after anybody who was really innocent, right? Where the fuck do you get that presumption from? Where did you think about where you got that from, right? You got that from the government, right? And these authority figures. And when somebody says that to me, and mind you, I used to have that mindset too, until I actually got some real experience with this, right? And the difference between us and all the people that are saying, "Oh, you must have done something because the government would never bring a case," that usually those people have zero experience, actual experience with what this machine is like. And once you get some experience with this machine, you will understand why we actually need something like Bitcoin that makes it very difficult for the government to come in and seize all your assets. If you've got fiat in a bank account and the government thinks you've committed some crime and they're going to charge you with it, they come in most of the time and they seize all your money before there's any adjudication of your guilt, right? Civil asset forfeiture, right? Then you're in federal court and it's, what do you need? $2 million to $2, $3, $4 million to effectively defend yourself in federal court, and they just took all your money and you're innocent? All of a sudden you're taking a plea of 5 to 10 years for something you didn't do. Bitcoin, why they hate it, is it makes it a lot harder to find your assets. It makes it harder to seize your assets, because one of the things that the regime, so to speak, a particular faction, I call it like the Biden regime, right, as opposed to the current administration in the United States, really wants to do is they're obsessed with control. And the number one way to control you is to control your money, right? Yeah. And there's a whole range of bank, anti-money laundering laws, the Bank Secrecy Act, all these things that regulate fiat currency that Bitcoin blows out of the water. And if you think you don't need privacy because you're some innocent, person that's as white as the driven snow, I just say to you, that doesn't matter, man. It doesn't matter. Like, you're just a child in this world believing that this moral framework exists that doesn't exist. And, most of the time it doesn't matter, right? Because this is why people tolerate it. It doesn't affect most people. But when it happens to you, it's a nightmare and it destroys your life.
All right, real talk for a second. We all know health insurance is basically the fiat system of healthcare. The biggest debauchery there is. It's expensive, confusing. Somehow you still end up paying hundreds of dollars for a Band-Aid. We moved to crowd sharing almost 5 years ago. It's the best decision we ever made. Instead of sending your money to the insurance company's black hole, you join a like-minded community that directly funds each other's medical bills. Simple, transparent, way cheaper. And that difference you save, you can invest in Bitcoin. It's an amazing win-win. And look, we're part of the Bitcoin community because we believe in freedom, decentralization. Crowd Health brings that same mindset to healthcare. You choose your doctor, you pay in cash, and the community's got your back when the big bills hit. No networks, no middlemen, no bureaucrats trying to approve your care, just people helping people the way it should be. You make decisions about your health. That's as sovereign as it gets. So if you're ready to take the orange pill for your health, this open enrollment, go to Join Crowd Health to get started for $99 for your first 3 months using code Brandon at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com, code Brandon. Crowd Health is not insurance. Opt out. Take your power back. This is how we win. Joincrowdhealth.com, code PLAY. If you haven't been living under a rock recently, you've seen that the world is completely changing. Seizures, freezing of assets, bail-ins, bailouts, everything and everyone are coming after your money, your time and energy, because the system is collapsing in and of itself. That's why Foundation created the Passport Core. Bitcoin revolution is 2 words: self-custody. Custodying your assets in your mind. This generates the private key to store your wealth forever. This is the revolution. Foundation is built on sovereignty, freedom, and privacy. Go to foundation.xyz/Brandon for $10 off your Passport Core. This beautiful, sleek foundation wallet is everything you need. The ergonomics, the feel, the weight are absolutely incredible. It also comes with the free Envoy app. You can buy Bitcoin straight into self-custody, label and track your coins, send secure air-gap transactions in seconds, beginner-friendly, but also powerful enough for the pros. Foundation is built for sovereignty, so you can take back control of your money in your digital life. Get started today, again, at foundation.xyz/Brandon for $10 off your Passport Core. Yeah. So before we get into some of these other things, let's unpack just, for those who aren't, I think some people out there may have heard of, and Mike, you and I were talking about this in Montreal, like Roman Storm's case. We're talking about Roman Sterlingov's case, right? There's these different cases where there's coin joins and mixers and privacy, and there's all these different cases that I think there's a fair amount of Bitcoiners who have heard elements of different things, right? They've heard little pieces of all these different cases. And I think a lot of people, quite honestly, like they're affected by it because they know there's something I should be doing about that, but they don't know what to do. So that's one part, but also just the Roman Sterlingov and what you guys have been working on. Could you give us just a rundown of what happened there, what's going on for the average person who doesn't know, and kind of where you guys are at, and then that can kind of segue into some of these other topics.
Yeah, sounds good. So that you bring up a good point. There's multiple Romans who have been implicated under these prosecutions. You have Roman Storm, Roman Semenov, and Roman Sterlingov. We represent Roman Sterlingov, who was accused of operating Bitcoin Fog. Bitcoin Fog was a darknet Bitcoin mixer. So if you want to obfuscate the source of your funds, or if you didn't want people to see which wallets were linked to your real world identity, you could send money through Bitcoin through Bitcoin Fog, and it would output to a recipient address of your choosing. One of the problems that came up in this case when we were searching for evidence was that it was difficult to identify sources of funds because Bitcoin Fog really worked really well. And the government couldn't find the sources of funds going in there, neither could we. Right? So that's why they wanted to take it down, obviously. But it was interesting early on that the judge said that mixing is legal in and of itself. And it's only illegal when you're doing it for an improper reason, such as like money laundering or tax evasion. Right. So I think that's a really cornerstone point that came out in our case. And that holding should, protect regular innocent users of mixers going forward. That said, we've seen the government go after people who we thought were going to be okay under the current laws. We were with we were talking with the Samurai Wallet guys about a week before they got indicted, and
wow.
Computer code is speech. So that case really blows my mind. The fact that they're holding the code writers accountable for the acts of the people who use the code. I think that's a deviation from the norm that threatens the integrity of devs around the world. I think that's a really, really important point. But, Roman's case kind of came to us in an interesting way because Roman's cousin is from Boston, Massachusetts, and he's buddies with a good friend of mine who's now passed away. Rest in peace, Sam. But Sam called me one day and he's like, there's this guy, Roman Sterlingov, he's been busted at the airport. Like, he doesn't know what to do. You're the only lawyer I know involved with crypto. Like, do you think you could help him? So me and Tor do a call with Roman, and we end up going to visit him. He was being held in the northern neck of Virginia, rural Virginia. It's the same jail where they had Michael Vick. And
owned by two judges.
Owned by two judges. Wow. Yeah. That was a crazy story. We learned about how the jail system in Virginia works. The Fed has a contract. The federal government has a contract with these state facilities, and judges are getting paid to keep people in there. Wild. So I'll leave you to figure out what that means, right?
Yeah, nice incentives.
Yeah. So
it's a feature, not a bug. It's a feature, not a bug.
Oh man.
Jeez. So we go down there and we're talking to Roman in the facility, and it immediately becomes apparent to both of us that he's totally innocent, and he didn't know what was going on. He didn't know where this all came from, or he didn't know he had been under investigation at all. The reason he had come to the United States is because he wanted to, become a pilot. He was signed up for pilot training lessons in California. So he flew over, and it was COVID time. So the only place he could fly into the States at that time was, or one of the easiest places, because he was from Europe, and Europe had shut down the air traffic to North America during this period in COVID, but Moscow didn't. So you're able to fly directly from Russia to America. So he quarantines in Russia, and then he comes over after he's allowed to travel again. And then, he lands at LAX. He's picked up by some pretty aggressive FBI agents. And the story just gets crazier from there.
So, one of the things that why people should care about Roman's story is that even if he was running Bitcoin Fog, he's in Sweden and Europe the entire time, right? And he's convicted in Washington, D.C., where there was no evidence of anything involving Bitcoin Fog, except for the fact that some government investigators mixed some government Bitcoin through Bitcoin Fog after they sent a message to the supposed Bitcoin Fog help desk saying, hey, is this a good site to launder drug money at? Basically is what it says, and they got no response, right? So if the theory of venue there is right, then the government can basically interact with your website anywhere in the world to do a transaction with your site, and then nab you when you come into the United States. As far as we could tell, Roman gets into Bitcoin in 2010, and for those of you old enough to remember, Bitcoin's trading at about 32 cents to the Bitcoin in 2010. So he's like an early adopter. And the best we can figure out why the government thinks he ran this mixer is we think he did a peer-to-peer transaction, peer-to-peer or whatever with somebody. Because back in the day, they would have Bitcoin meetups where you'd be like, okay, I want $100 worth of Bitcoin. Okay, here's $100. Okay, here's the address. That he did a peer-to-peer transaction with the people who actually started Bitcoin Fog, because when they arrest him at the airport, they seize like 3 laptops, 3 terabytes with the hard drives, all these thumb drives, his personal diaries, an Excel spreadsheet of all his internet passwords. There's nothing on there mentioning running Bitcoin Fog. As a matter of fact, there wasn't a single piece of direct evidence in the entire case of him ever operating Bitcoin Fog. He used Bitcoin Fog, right? And he's never disputed. And I think that's another reason they think, oh, he must have done it, right?
Well, we talked to him about that when we
follow
were in
these traces in the case that the government did, right? You see them doing these long, convoluted traces through all these addresses that they don't have the private keys to. And finally, you'll get back to like Roman's Mt. Gox account, which he's the only person I know who KYC'd a Mt. Gox account in 2011. If you don't know what KYC means, it means know your customer. He gave up his like Swedish driver's license and everything, put his name on it because Roman was a damn Boy Scout, right? And this is for all you innocent Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts out there who think that the government is not going to come after you because you're innocent and you do everything by the book. He did everything by the book, and that was the reason they went after him, right? And now he's got 12 and a half years. You want privacy because you don't even want to be on the government's radar, right? Mm-hmm. Because in this case, when he gave up his privacy to KYC stuff, and you get these, the people you went to high school with who are now government investigators being like, look, there's a name at this end of this trail. It's Roman, right? And then you've got all this big money coming in the form of this company like Chainalysis that's trying to get all these government contracts. And you have all these incentives to find somebody guilty and get a bunch of press off of it, right? Because whether you like it or not, money in the United States, and I'm guessing in every justice system in the world, matters, and it distorts the justice system. 100%. So, if you get anything from this podcast, get that stupid notion out of your head that the justice system doesn't prosecute innocent people and you have got nothing to hide, so you're going to expose everything to the government like an idiot and then coming running to me and Mike when they've thrown you in jail because you KYC'd your shit and left the trail all over the place, and all of a sudden, you got to spend a ton of money defending yourself. Your innocence, your notions of innocence will all go up in smoke, you naive little child.
Well, that's the kind of fire we need, Tor. I love it. Yeah, beautifully said. Okay, so there's numerous questions I have. However, I feel like, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, would it make sense to kind of go back into time here briefly and just explain some of the history quickly of, the OFAC, the Bank Secrecy Act, like some of these things over the last 50, 60 years that have led us to where we are today? Because it feels like at this point, there's so many layers on every human, whether you're talking to your brother, or your sister, or an aunt or an uncle, like these people in your life, they're like, I get a lot of these problems, guys, but like, what am I going to do? It just goes right back to head in the sand. And it's just like, you feel like, what do we do? So we can get to some of the solutions too later, but what I would love for you guys to just touch on maybe is just some of the history of what's led us to where we are today, where you just feel like you're so hamstrung that you can't even move almost.
Well, I'll just start with one thing and then I'll hand it out to Mike. But like what really starts this in America, I think, is the New Deal. Right? When you've got the market collapse in 1929 and capitalism is on the verge of collapse, and FDR and the Democrats step in and they create this massive administrative state that seeks to regulate what they perceive to be all the flaws in the free market system. Right? You get the Securities and Exchange Commissions, you get the Commodities Future Trading Commission, right? And this regulation and this sort of administrative police state just grows and grows and grows. And then in 1970, you get something called the Bank Secrecy Act, which imposes all those reporting requirements that if you're in the U.S. you probably know of. Oh, if you're going to put more than $10,000, through the bank, you got to report it, right? And then there's, OFAC, you talked about the Office of Foreign Asset Control. You get the New Deal straight in 1970, you get all these sort of financial controls that. So there's a saying I heard recently I really like, and that's complexity is a subsidy for the rich. And what I think, whereas I think maybe the Banking Secrecy Act was made with good intentions, like most bureaucratic crap, it rapidly gets taken hold of by particular factions. And in this instance, I think it's the fiat currency banks, right? Because they can afford to hire lawyers and everybody to meet the cost of the regulatory complexity of compliance with the BSA. And what that does is it freezes out people who don't have that money. So it kind of imposes this kind of monopoly. The government's okay with that monopoly because then they've got more control over the people because now they know where all the money's around, where you're going, right? 2008, with Satoshi's white paper, that changes everything. Because all of a sudden you've created money that the government can't control, and now you've been watching them freak out about that for whatever the last couple of decades, and they're going to toss it off the mic to fill in the blanks.
Yeah, at that point, when Roman's first getting into Bitcoin, that was very much the landscape. It's in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. And, he told me that the first time he ever purchased Bitcoin was from a bar. He had heard about it on some online forums, and he had just met up with somebody randomly at a bar. They both sat there, grabbed a beer, and popped open their laptops. And he bought about 2,000 euros worth of Bitcoin, which was pretty much all of his savings. He never had any serious jobs. He wasn't he'd been bouncing around. He was in early 20s. And he ended up making this purchase of Bitcoin. And then it started to grow like right away, right? The way he framed it to us, and he called it was like having a magic wallet that no matter how much I spent out of it, the value just kept going up, and I thought that was a really, really sweet quote. But so he ends up going around to these different Bitcoin meetups. He's living in Gothenburg, Sweden, and he's going around Scandinavia, continental Europe, and the Baltics to these different Bitcoin meetups. And he kind of became one of the guys who, if you wanted to get some Bitcoin, you'd go up to Roman. And, like Tor was mentioning, you could buy $100 or 100 euros of cash and turn it into Bitcoin by going to Roman. He'd help you set up your wallet, help you secure your private keys and your seed phrase. And, he was definitely there in the Bitcoin world at that time. And he wasn't like a big player or anything, basically. But he was just, he's spreading word of Bitcoin before most people have ever even heard the word. And it was during one of those conferences that somebody came up to him and said, "Hey, man, like, I see that you have a decent stack of Bitcoin. Like, this is how I saw that." So he explained to him that on the blockchain, there's 5 pieces of information registered. There's a sender's wallet address, the recipient's wallet address, the amount, the time, and the transaction. And with the transaction ID on a block explorer, you can look up the counterparty's wallet and you can see how much Bitcoin is in there. So he's like, "Dude, like, you got a lot of Bitcoin. You're going around like staying at hostels, going to these conferences. Like, you should probably be securing yourself. There's something out there called Bitcoin Fog, which is a mixing service." So from that point on, Roman was like, "Okay, well, when I do these transactions with people who I don't know, I'll send the money through Bitcoin Fog before it receives or it gets sent to their wallet, so that it would, keep people from being able to pry into his own personal information and prevent that threat vector from coming about." So he does that for a couple of years. And when Kraken and Coinbase come out, particularly Kraken, he had one, he saw that as an easier way to secure his Bitcoin by putting it on a big exchange, because he had it in some self-hosted wallets. He had it in like local Bitcoins account. Mt. Gox went under. He was having trouble like spending his Bitcoin, right? So he puts it all through Bitcoin Fog and into his new Kraken account, KYC Kraken account, right? And one of the things that the government introduced at trial was like, "Hey, you got these Kraken accounts. The source of all these funds is from what they called the Bitcoin Fog cluster." And this is a huge topic for both of our appeal, which we filed on September 15th. And it was also in the trial, because Chainalysis and the government have been working together to figure out and determine what a cluster is. So basically, it's a collection of addresses that they associate to be with a particular identity without any private keys, without any names behind the numbers. It's very much based on assumptions and complex heuristics, during which Chainalysis and other investigators are forced to make a bunch of assumptions about the data to come up with a determination. And that's one of the big problems that we have as far as the digital forensic evidence in this case, is that the amount of assumptions that were used in linking Roman to the operation of Bitcoin Fog goes beyond what we think the federal standard are in a federal criminal trial. And that's one of the main issues, along with venue, as Tor mentioned earlier, that we brought up on appeal.
And to go to back to your question about, again, why should people use privacy? Well, Roman engages in the privacy to protect himself from criminals, right? And all I say to you is, what makes you think the government isn't a criminal too? Right? Like, just like, so, I mean, there's the argument for privacy just to protect yourself from private actors, and there's the argument for privacy to protect yourself from governmental actors, because I don't think in terms of criminality, there's not that much of a difference. Like, people are like, oh, the president of the United States right now is a criminal. I'm like, you say that like something's changed.
Right.
Like what, where do you read your history? Right. Like, did you believe everything that was told to you and spoon fed you when you were a child, and now you're an adult and you've never had occasion to question it because you're just part of the machine? You know, or maybe you're one of the enforcers. Maybe it gets you off. Anyhow.
Yeah. No,
Meow.
yeah. It's absolutely right. I mean, boy, this is, where do you guys see like the old world? I mean, it feels like, because you know, we brought up the SEC, you know, OFAC, and a lot of these things, and for a number of years, this has been this problem that Bitcoiners have run into of the technologies of the world, and then, you know, Bitcoin being this aggregation basically of a bunch of technologies, this discovery, a protocol, so a bunch of technologies to make this protocol. It's innovating faster than the legacy world, the governments of the world can catch up to it. So it's like, where do you guys see this in the legal world, where, like you said, it's just like the prosecution, they're bringing this case, but they're like constantly behind. You have like they're trying to set these precedents and get these paydays and just go after people. They're making these like illogical jumps and conclusions to, like, you know, work backwards, and then there's the gap, and then they can't figure it out. So like, well, this is good enough. And like, where do we go from here? Like, just as I mean, and then zooming out even more, I mean, people, you can really feel society starting to lose a lot of trust in a lot of these systems, you know, whether it's the military or police and then the legal system. It's like, that's not a good area for the society to be in, obviously. And so, like, where do you see these worlds like coming together, or they're colliding, but how do you see this kind of shaking out as you go forward, the old world with these new technologies?
I think Bitcoin is winning. I think Satoshi is winning. I think the side that is losing in this is, like, you know, Nobel Prize winning economist Paul Krugman, who's like, Bitcoin's not money, you can't use it, I'll get Bitcoin. I'm like, dude, what? You got the Nobel Prize and you don't even have a decent theory of money? Because Bitcoin to me is just a token I can exchange for goods and services. That's what fucking money is, right? And I didn't even, like, when we first got it in 2013, I didn't think it was a big deal. I was like, oh, it's money, right? And then people start freaking out about it. Was it like 2016, 2017? And the government doesn't even know what it is, right? Mm-hmm. And now I mean, you have a big shift with Trump, right? Like, I'm optimistic, at least I think that's a good thing about this current administration, is they're not afraid of a financial revolution that's inevitable. But I think, you know, if there's a swing in the election in the United States, you're going to see another attempt at regulation. But I think Bitcoin's become so powerful. When we're going to these Bitcoin conferences now, like, you know, Bitcoin Nashville or whatever it was the last we went to, like Vegas, right? Early on, there weren't these big law firms or banks there, all this stuff like this. Now it's like I'm listening to, like, presentations from white shoe law firms, DeFi. Yep. It's like they can't ignore the power or the money.
I'm pretty sure you're talking about the stablecoin conference from Las Vegas this year.
Yeah, the stablecoin conference in Vegas, right? That was what's nice about being at the Canadian Bitcoin conference. It was a lot smaller. It wasn't so, like, because it's no longer underground. Like, it's like mainstream. Bitcoin's on mainstream, which is cool. I mean, I don't think. I think that's just proof of how solid it is. All this other stuff I don't know about, but it's a revolution in finance. And I mean, it's funny. It's almost like the left is acting like the conservatives now. They don't want change to the old banking system, and the conservatives on the right in America are all for this radical innovation, right? Like when I listen to Elizabeth Warren talk about Bitcoin, I'm like, oh, you're just representing the old banking interests. I mean, I'm not a Marxist, but it's enough to make me a Marxist to the extent that she is just exhibiting, her class interests straight up, and it's not even hard to see, but she's just painting a veneer of like whatever left wing like liberality on it, so somehow it's supposed to be palatable. I don't know. I went off on a little tangent there because I think Elizabeth Warren and JP Diamond are secretly dating. But he came out. JP Diamond came out the other day and said, "Oh yeah, no, Bitcoin's for real now." Yeah, and I remember when he was dissing Bitcoin because my next door neighbor, my partner, was head of fucking blockchain trading for JP Morgan Chase. So like that guy's full of shit, right? But at least I can reconcile with that the fact that he's a private CEO. It's these people in government who are pretending like they're not acting for the banking interests or the big law interests that hire them after they're in government. Those people I don't trust, right? Like, Anyhow.
Mike, did you have something to chime in on there? I don't know earlier if you were trying to jump in.
Yeah, well, what Tor was talking about with the conflict of interest, that's what we ran into in Roman's case, and I hit on it a little bit earlier, but there were multiple instances where people who were involved in the investigation of Roman Sterlingov wound up working or getting contracts with Chainalysis. And the first one, we tried to call her as a witness. The first interest was the prosecutor, right? Catherine Alden-Pelker. And she started as an investigator in the case, and you have a right to call investigators. But then she became a prosecutor on the case, right? The two original prosecutors that were on the case, Yuli Lee and Zia Faruqi. Yuli Lee then went on to become senior legal director at Chainalysis with a substantial salary. And Zia Faruqi ended up being a magistrate judge in D.C. and from what I hear is being pretty sympathetic to accepting this kind of digital forensic evidence and moving the goalpost forward towards Chainalysis having legitimate ability to introduce their evidence in trials, right? There was another guy who was investigating the case, this guy Aaron Bice. He had a private company called Exigent that during the process of the investigation, well, he gets thanked in DOJ's press release as part of Roman's arrest. So his name and his company's name are top billing in that real big piece of news. And next thing you know, that company is being bought by Chainalysis and being acquired.
Jeez.
And even though Exigent was thanked in the initial press release,
not a single piece of evidence from that trial.
Any evidence? Nothing came in about them. So we don't really know what they do even.
We tried to raise all that sort of like, well, what's going on here? Why is an investigator's company being bought 5 months after our client's arrest by the principal forensic investigator in the case? And he wouldn't let us go down that path because he's, I think, in part or possibly because he's former deputy general counsel for DOJ, which is another problem you have in the United States. DOJ, for people who don't know, is Department of Justice. They prosecute federal computer crimes, but like 40-50% of the federal bench judges in the United States are former DOJ. There's this overwhelming bias in favor of the government when you step into a federal court, which is why 90% of cases just plead out. People plead guilty. Why innocent people plead guilty? Privacy, man. Privacy isn't illegal. It's a human right. And a big part of what the United States is founded on, and it used to operate from, is our privacy, right? That's what the Bill of Rights is about, right? You've got freedom of conscience, you've got freedom from unreasonable government searches, blah, 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 right? So I don't know why privacy is controversial with anybody. And if you're not doing it, it's just like having unprotected sex. You're exposing yourself to really dangerous stuff needlessly. You can't trust the government any more than you can trust a whole crowd of people, right? Actually, I would trust the crowd of people more than I would trust the government.
Now that you have your hardware wallet, the key that it generated needs to be stored in something forever that can withstand fire, flood, nuclear fallout, checks, hockey pucks. This is your 12-word C plate, your 24-word C plate. after a lot of people asking for a 12-word seed plate, here it is, stampseed.com, code Brandon for 15% off. After everything that's going on in the world, fires we've seen in the Pacific Palisades, what we've seen happen in Hawaii, everything gone. Titanium seed plates withstands everything. Your posterity will thank you. It only takes a few minutes. Don't let these little things, these small investments scare you from the most important aspects of Bitcoin and the first money we have ever conceived here on Earth. Stampseed.com, code Brandon for 15% off. Everything you are learning in this episode is completely moot and does not matter if you hold Bitcoin and are still leaving it on an exchange or sharing keys and your KYC information with a third party. This is your wake-up call now. You are only self-sovereign if you alone hold the keys to your wealth. 100% self-custody sounds daunting at first. Believe me, I lost 2 years of massive gains over a decade ago because I was worried about taking a few minutes it took to understand self-custody. And that's exactly why you need to talk to my friends, Tony Yazbek and his team at the Bitcoin Way. We just interviewed Tony recently, has over 80,000 views, an overwhelming response. People love his story and the simplicity he shares of how easy it is to custody and take ownership of the greatest money we've ever seen. They'll train you to do it right the first time. Head on over to thebitcoinway.com/Brandon to schedule a free 30-minute consultation today. Their 5-star rated service is exactly what you need. Quit sitting on your hands like I did and get started today. Again, that's thebitcoinway.com/BRANDON. That's saying something. Yeah. What do you need to do? There's such great points. I mean, what do you like? How do things, begin to change? Like, how does Bitcoin flip those incentives? Because it feels like you said, I mean, you've allowed this, you see how like over time, bad precedent, bad case law can come about. You had this world where, like, again, people are pleading out because it just feels like we're at this point in society where the state has the money printer, or I shouldn't say it's not money, it's currency. They have a currency printer. There's nothing backing it, so it's not money. And they have a currency printer where they can just endlessly lawfare you to death, no matter who you are, Roman Sterlingov or me, you guys, who it doesn't matter. They can just throw you in there and like, okay, well, you're going to outprint us. You can't. You don't have, you will run out of cash before we do. And they can just lawfare you into pleading, and then it sets bad precedent, and it just like spirals out of control. And it feels like we've been doing this for decades now, going back to your point of the last, the New Deal on forward. So like, how do we flip the incentives in this structure? Like, how does Bitcoin fit into this, where we can start turning the tables?
Just keep using it. I mean, look what's happened from people just using it. Like when I first got it when Roman first gets it in 2010, it's at 32 cents. When I first get it in 2013, it's $42. And this morning I cried when I saw how much it had crashed down to $106,000, right? Like that's all we need, right? And I think we need to resist this urge to regulate it more and more. I'm not for these central bank digital currencies, right? Because what's beautiful about Bitcoin is it's not a fucking creature of the state. And that is a step in our evolution to minimizing the state's control over us. I'm not arguing that we don't need a state. I think we need some kind of minimal state, whatever, for self-defense, for, basic needs for people who've gotten screwed or, dealt the wrong cards. But the government shouldn't be controlling our money like this because it gives them too much power to control our lives. And, the technology has changed, but psychology hasn't changed in millennia. And the same psychologies you see throughout history, these authoritarian psychologies that slaughter, that are intolerant, that enslave, it's still here, right? I think people have this notion like, oh, history's over. It's just that thing I read in a history book. Oh, look, Hitler, that would only happen in 1933. No, man, it's like still going on, right? And that's where Bitcoin at least gives you the ability to have control of your currency and hide it from those maniacs, right? And, all it takes is for all of us Bitcoiners to just keep on participating in that economy. And, right?
Yeah.
And we need guys writing mixers like Samurai Wallet and whoever did Bitcoin Fog and all the coin joins, pay joins, all these ways of masking and keeping them from tracing stuff. Because the fact of the matter is, once you exchange out for cash off the blockchain, then they've got a point of attribution. And then if you haven't mixed, they're going to fall it all the way back and you're fucked, right? So this notion like it's untraceable, that's another dangerous notion because they will trace back, and sometimes they'll just trace back and arrest the person whose name they found, which is what happened in Roman Sterlingov's case.
Mm-hmm. What's really disturbing about the traces that they did in Roman's case is that there's so many different Bitcoin addresses between the one that they alleged conducted the criminal activity, which in this case was registering the domain name for a website, which that's another whole issue. I don't think that should be legal in the first place by itself. But there's 19 different hops of unidentified Bitcoin wallets that they don't have the private keys for, and then there's Roman's KYC account. He could have gone and given somebody at one of those conferences the 100 euros, right? And then they give it to another person. They give it to another person. It keeps going down this line, and the custody keeps changing. There's nothing to prove that all those wallets should be clustered in the same entity. And that's the risk that we're running with this inaccurate forensic software and forensic blockchain tracing being done by private companies like TRM Labs and Chainalysis on behalf of the US government. It's leading to inaccurate results because they're skipping the identification process. They don't know who it was controlling, and they're wrongfully attributing it to somebody way down the line who happened to KYC his accounts.
It's wild. It makes me think of, again, numerous things here. Where do you guys think that there's I was talking to Jeff Booth the other day, and we just released that episode last week, and we were talking about Bitcoin being a protocol and how people need to not confuse Bitcoin as just another asset in the system, right? In the fiat system. It's like, it's another, to your point, Tor, it's when we think of it too, where, like you said, staying in Bitcoin, and when you try to keep jumping, you give this point of attribution of you jumping back into the fiat system. And it's like, well, it's just in my Fidelity account, or like, it's just like some other asset inside this fiat system, when in reality, it's a lifeboat off of that sinking fiat Titanic. Like they're two separate ships here. Mm-hmm. And I think that's real lesson for people to really internalize that these are completely separate systems that we're in, and Bitcoin's the only thing like that. There's nothing else out there that's even remotely close to that. So I think that and then you were talking about too, about making examples of people so they don't want to make new software and code stuff and work and develop. It just feels like that, where they're clamping down, whether it was Silk Road stuff, or Roman Sterlingov, or like all these different things have been trying to, like, hey, we can't stop it, so we're going to try to make it psychologically where people don't want to use the system, they don't want to develop, create new things. Is that kind of what you're alluding to, or what you're kind of thinking about? Or
I think that is a old feature of the system, and a lot of what we perceive as, oh my God, what's going on? This must be some new thing, is really just us realizing we hadn't noticed it before. Like, I feel like a lot of when I first started acting as a, federal criminal defense lawyer for these hackers and stuff like that, before I had this, I had what I call the naive view of the government and all this kind of stuff. But then when I actively interact with it, there's like this moment of awakening. And then I go back and I look at like what, some of the people who wrote the Bill of Rights, what they were saying, what they were concerned with, and I see it's the exact same thing, right? It's the authoritarian drive in certain factions of the tribe will always be there, right? Just like there's always going to be the people fighting for the the privacy interests, and I do think that, and I do think that they're always seeking control. Like, I see it. I mean, that's what we're fighting. Mike and I are fighting with. So to speak, on the front lines. On one front line, there is their main form of attack of our interests from our tribe, right? Which is their prosecutors and the criminal justice system, which is completely out of control. And as people are like, "Oh, Trump's weaponizing," and I'm like, "Really? You're new to this party, huh?" Because every time I see the administration change, I see a DOJ's prosecutorial priorities change, and you see this as one thing that's a singularity to one particular political party. I'm like, no, man, it's a feature, it's not a bug, and you're only noticing it because it's been turned on you. And I think the answer is it shouldn't be turned on anybody. Period. Whatever your political beliefs are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Mike, did you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, we don't only need financial privacy to protect ourselves from federal government. It's really important for the capitalist system to have privacy as a feature. If you're trying to make a deal with somebody and they can look up to see how much money you have in your account or how much Bitcoin you can have in your wallet, that just totally destroys all of your negotiating power. right? And without effective negotiation in private deals, capitalism as we know it can't move forward. And having everything open like that and being able to see how much money a particular entity has is going to jeopardize deals all over the place if people aren't properly securing their financial interests and financial privacy.
I like that argument, and I pick it up that privacy is actually a necessity for capitalism,
Yep.
because if your information isn't private, you lose all of your deal leverage, right? So it's a transactional question as well. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Privacy is necessary to the functionality of capitalism. Suck on that, Elizabeth Warren.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. In speaking of just the free market and such, what we've mentioned the Constitution, the Bill of Rights a few times, and that's something close to my heart as well. And I always liken just in a macro sense, what kind of explaining to people just the essence of Bitcoin and kind of some of the things it does for the average person. Of hey, Bitcoin or the Bill of Rights and the Constitution gave a lot of these freedoms or self-evident truths to the people inside the United States, or maybe just in the walls of the United States. But Bitcoin gives property rights to people globally, right? Anyone that can download and get some Bitcoin or work and earn in Bitcoin. Now you have the Bitcoin white paper at work for you, the Bill of Rights, in essence, the Constitution for you globally. I would love one of you guys to just touch on just some of that, like some of the interplay between Bitcoin itself and in the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, privacy, some of these things. Because again, I think this is something that's very important that gets very little talk time anywhere, even in the Bitcoin spaces.
So one of the things I like about Bitcoin is that it's accessible to everybody. It doesn't discriminate, just like you say. You can download the blockchain, have it on your computer, and it gives a transactional freedom that you don't have with fiat and these banks with all these bank fees. And I think that's why you see crypto being used, and Bitcoin. Sorry, I use the word crypto in a Bitcoin podcast. Why you see it being used in I don't know if underfunded is the right word for parts of the world like Africa and developing countries, or maybe places that don't have a stable political economic regime. What you have with the blockchain is stability, right? And reliability, and something that, at least so far historically, has just gone up in value, even though there's all sorts of spikes along the way.
And it's secure. It's been in the past.
Secure.
It's been very expensive for people to access the same level of security that exists on the Bitcoin blockchain. And now, just by participating in it, you can tap into that security in a way that individuals have never been able to do so in the past.
And that's different than like when the Fed prints money or whatever it does, moves over some, a period on a ledger and a computer, right? It gives that money to the banks, right? Doesn't give that money directly to you, right? Whereas anybody can go and mine Bitcoin, or participate in that. It's just, it's such a revolution in finance. I see why it freaked out the established order, because particularly the banking order. I mean, for me, like one of the first things I honestly started using it is it was the easiest way to transfer money across borders without this stupid SWIFT system from the 1970s, or ACH, which took forever. I had a client who we got their conviction vacated, so I had to get him his like 50 grand, from his bond, refund it to him. And I was trying to do it through my bank. My bank's like, that's going to take 2 weeks. I was like, dude, you take Bitcoin? He's like, yeah. I was like, bub, right? Like, it just, I mean, it's another reason Bitcoin's good for capitalism, is it increases transaction efficiency on a huge scale, but the banks then can't make the money on the float, on the overnight. Like one of the reasons that they hold your money is so while they're holding it, right, they can trade it, right, and they lend it out. The banks don't get any of the float on your Bitcoin, so of course they're against it. I got a little away from the Bill of Rights, but whatever.
No. I mean, unless you have something to add to that, Mike. I mean, that's something that. Where do you see just even the future of banks and some of these legacy institutions just in general as Bitcoin moves forward? Do you think, I know Hal Finney obviously wrote about, Bitcoin banking and things like that. And again, we kind of talk about these old world, new world, and trying to marry these two together. And it feels like round hole, square peg at times. Like, what do you guys see in terms of again, it could be the governmental entities, it could be, the IRSs and SECs, could be the banking system. Like, how do you think things are going to change just from what you guys get to see, which is, so different from just the average person and what they're seeing when they're using Bitcoin or hodling? And how do you see things playing out in those terms?
I mean, we see this going on in all areas of technology when it interacts with law. The legal world and the courts are constantly trying to take precedents and statutes that were justified under past situations and applying them to the world of technology. And sometimes, like you said, it's just like trying to fit a round peg in a square hole. It doesn't fit. And then they try to come up with new interpretations of it in this new technological environment. That's one of the things that we ran into in Roman's case when it came to venue. Right. Like Tor explained earlier, if the government can access your website and then hail you into court in whatever jurisdiction they want, that presents a threat to everyone around the world who runs a website. They're going to have to register with DC local money transmission regulations that they probably have never heard of with the risk of IRS agents sitting in DC tapping into the website and then holding you accountable for a statute in a jurisdiction that you've never done business in.
And that was one of the things that Roman got charged with, was
the
the violation of the DC municipal money laundering statute, right?
Yeah,
Like, no, money
the fourth
transmission
count.
statute. Yeah. And he'd never set foot in DC. Sorry, Michael. Could you?
Yeah, but we see this happen, and not just in venue, but all kinds of different legal doctrines as they're applied to technology, because computer law is the focus of our practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't always fit, and we're trying to carve a new path and come up with new justifications and interpretations for existing statutes. And the government, on the other hand, is trying to do the exact opposite. And sometimes we win, sometimes they win, but the legal framework that guides how people should be conducting their activities in this realm it's changing fast, and we're at the front lines of dealing with that and trying to re-identify how to go forward.
Yeah, it's changing so fast. I'm hesitant to predict anything, and I'm also remembering that guy who said, remember when the Soviet Union fell, he said, it's the end of history, right? Oh yeah, how'd that work out for you, bro? Fukuyama, okay, he's never going to live that one down.
Yeah.
He can write as many books and essays as he wants.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I don't know, I know these banks or some kind of, at the moment, as long as you have nation states that are protecting their currency, and you want to buy something in those nation states, you're going to have to convert your Bitcoin through an exchange. And I think that'll be the regulatory choke point, will be the exchanges and cashing your money out, but I don't know what's going to happen to banks now that I think it's a technology that renders them largely obsolete.
The courts don't fully understand Bitcoin. Early on in Roman's case, we were asked by the judge, hey, can't we just subpoena the administrator of the blockchain and get the records of this and sort this all out? And we just started laughing. For the person in charge of a federal cryptocurrency criminal trial to be asked if we can subpoena the administration of the blockchain.
He just asked if there was
Craig
an
Wright?
Administrator to the blockchain.
It shows a fundamental misunderstanding.
Where the fuck is Craig Wright? Yeah. That's what we should have
That's what
said
he said,
to the judge.
Like, let me dial up Craig.
Your Honor, we will get hold of Mr. Craig Wright and produce him in this court immediately. We present to you the administrator of the blockchain.
Unreal. Can't make this stuff up. I mean, you really can't.
Picture Craig Wright in DOJ. Picture Craig Wright as an IRS criminal investigator. Picture Craig Wright as an FBI agent, and then you can get, it changes your conception of the people that are running these things, right? Because if your conception is that there isn't someone like Craig Wright in government, again, I say to you, that's naive, man. What basis do you really have for that? And then probably none, right? Because, most people don't have the direct experience with that. And, we just get it by accident. It's not like we're seeing anything that they wouldn't see if they weren't in our spot, They're just not in our spot. And,
What do you guys think? And again, that we're bringing up in a funny way to say it, but also at the same time, it's not funny because again, we're round peg square holing. We're trying to get to this new world, and we're having which naturally you're going to have all these issues, right? Like again, when these worlds are colliding, there are going to be issues. We're humans. We don't want these issues to happen, but they're going to happen. So we have to work through them. But some of these things, like, does it surprise you guys at times how? Like the prosecution or like the state coming with these things again, these people are humans, like they don't even understand it. Like is some of your case in a way, like I know for me I'd want to be like explaining like, hey, this is you're so wrong because like this and it benefits you, by the way, like, hey, Mr. Other Human that I'm here deliberating against or fighting against, like you benefit from this as well. Like how much of that is like these people again, they just don't even get it, and they're so like blinded by the fiat like paycheck in a sense, like the state told me to do this, and like I don't. Did guys ever when you're talking, does it ever like kind of, if you guys orange pill people like in the process of like this stuff happening and they're like, oh wow, like I never thought of that, like what does that look like?
I think it's very rare for anyone ever to be convinced by any kind of argument, because this notion that rationality rules the world and is somehow persuasive, again, is I think one of those naive notions that they teach you in school, but it's just not the reality. We're, whether we like it or not, we're all caught up in our own particular worldview. And say what you want about Marx. I'm not a Marxist, but he does have a point when he says, sort of the worldview of your class is sort of a form of blinders. So I just, I don't
keep your enemies closer.
Yeah,
got it right
yeah, right. And I'm a capitalist, but I think if you haven't read Marx, you don't understand basic economics. You don't understand basic economics. And
Absolutely.
you do have on one level a series of competing class interests that doesn't make any one class or the other particularly bad or good or virtuous or evil for that matter, but they don't see what I think they miss. What I see most in DOJ is the financial motives and sort of the class interests at play. They think that when they're prosecuting Bitcoiners or whatever, that they're prosecuting evil. And I don't think the solution to that is rational argument. I think it is honestly to decriminalize most of what has been criminalized and minimize the size of these law enforcement agencies to just being able to deal with really important stuff: terrorism, sex trafficking, whatever, right? They've just gotten so big now that there's more law enforcement agents than crimes. So they sit around and they take these elastic statutes that Congress passed in the 20th century and apply them in novel ways to rack up convictions, which they, keep scores on like a baseball hitter on their website.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Do you? For the average person, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but someone just again trying to hodl, they're in self custody. We've had these different things going on just over time of like even recently. I think it was the current administration that it was something a little bit off that they were doing about what was it, the self custody, and they were going to look at it as not a money transmitter, but they were you're going to be on a list somewhere or something like that, and just like how do we how do we get around some of those things where it's just like, again, people trying to hold their money and you're like at the end of the barrel, so to speak. And no matter who's, like you said, whether it's the next person in government or whoever that's controlling things. And, the average person just feels like, hey, I can't get into Bitcoin because of these possible scenarios that might play out, or I'm falsely accused of a crime, which again, like you guys are dealing with right now. I mean, what does that look like in those terms going forward? Like, how does that, maybe, Mike, maybe you take it, like, what are your thoughts and just trying to, again, round peg, square hole, right? Like, it just feels like it keeps coming back to this clash.
Yeah. First of all, everyone should give Bitcoin a shot. Everyone should be trying to figure it out, because this is a path away and path towards independence and away from a crumbling fiat system. So I don't think that what happened to Roman should be used as an excuse not to get into Bitcoin in the first place. I think that generally it's pretty safe. But people aren't dropping like flies left, right, and center. But there are these instances where innocent people are being accused of things they didn't do. And that's due to sloppy forensics, right? So in federal court in the United States, you have a case called Daubert, and it lists off a whole bunch of requirements that expert evidence needs to meet in order to be introduced as evidence in a federal criminal trial. The evidence needs to be peer reviewed. It needs to have a known error rate. You need to take an inquiry into the accuracy of whatever you're trying to produce, right? When we questioned Chainalysis expert who was put on the stand by the federal government in Roman's case, they didn't meet a single one of the Daubert factors. Yet their sloppy forensics were allowed to be introduced in front of the jury and result in a wrongful conviction. And that's one of the main things that we have on appeal. Our appeal, there's so many issues. There's like at least a dozen hit issues that if in any other case would be probably the main one. We got venue, we got sufficiency of the evidence, we got this Daubert challenge. And what I find to be very scary was that, the federal courts just kind of rubber stamped whatever the prosecutors wanted to bring in, and then also challenged and made it very difficult for us to bring anything in. At one time, we had gone and spoken at Bitcoin 2023, I think it was, in Miami, big conference. And this is before the trial. And somebody came up to me after our presentation and said, dude, like what's happened to Roman is super messed up, man. This is my Alamo. I want to help you guys out, right? So he was a blockchain tracer for a company called CipherTrace. And CipherTrace was then bought by MasterCard. So we had the backing of MasterCard and CipherTrace, and these guys were working on tracing to prove that the government couldn't establish Roman as the operator of Bitcoin Fog. The expert from CipherTrace was pretty much the only expert that we've been able to get in to challenge Chainalysis blockchain tracing methodologies. And a week before trial, MasterCard just pulls their support. And we don't know what happened, but they all lawyered up, and we lost our key expert witness that would have been able to show that Roman was in fact innocent, and we don't know what happened there.
We have our suspicions because they asked us to sign a protective order. Protective order is just this document you sign saying, "I'm not going to leak all the documents." Right? You routinely sign them in criminal cases, but as far as we can tell, for the first time ever in a federal criminal case, they asked us to sign a protective order with a 5-year non-compete clause against Chainalysis. So like we couldn't compete with Chainalysis for 5 years. And I'm like looking at it like, wait a minute, this is federal criminal defense, man. Someone's going into a cage here. Why am I looking at this transactional clause in this protective order that I would never even tell my transactional clients to sign? But it's just another thing. And Roman's case is insane like that. It's like you see everything that's wrong with this system and its intersection with new technologies coming into play. And at the end of the day, I really convinced he's innocent. Like, Mike, right? Like, do you, like...
Yeah, 100% innocent. We got an innocent person rotting in jail right now.
Yeah, like, just bad forensics and this...
And we weren't even allowed to look
zeal
at the data behind Chainalysis. Their program is called Chainalysis Reactor. And we weren't even allowed to look at the code that made up Reactor.
The source code, yeah, we can the source code, because we refused to sign that non-compete. And so what happened is that was one of the excuses that I think MasterCard or whoever over there on CyberTrace used to pull our tracing expert the week before trial, right? It was like, and we sometimes like wonder, was there a phone call made kind of thing in the back room? Because there's a lot of money at stake with these tracing companies. And that's what I think really calls their objectivity into question, because they don't profit unless they get convictions for the government. And that's where I think the perversion of the profit motive comes into the justice system. And I just don't think there should ever be any profit motive in the justice system, because it results in, well, I guess what I would just call evil. And another example of that is the private prison system.
Absolutely wild. What do cases like Roman Sterlingov's mean for Bitcoin's future as a privacy preserving network in your guys' eyes? Like where do you Like, did you guys realize it would be this big of a test and just kind of, drag out this far and just this fight and versus privacy and surveillance? I mean, we have, digital IDs are coming. We've got the CBDC stuff. We got the 15-minute cities, like all these things. And you guys are kind of, really at this, not kind of, I mean, you guys are at the center of a lot of this right now in a way, just kind of the fight for humanity. I mean, what's going forward? I mean, let's put it really, bluntly. This is, which direction it is, the meme and the fork in the road, like Bitcoin and freedom or CBDCs and slavery. And this is really the, ground zero for it.
Yep.
I agree. I mean, that's something we've always liked to be like, I'll do these kinds of cases because it is a little bit like the wild, wild west. Mm-hmm. I have no idea how it's going to play out. But if I look at things historically, I think I don't think this battle ever ends. It's, we're fighting battles in an ancient war against a system of control. And then there's the people who don't want to be controlled by it. And those are just two fundamental competing drives of society. Sometimes I think it's just evolution hedging its bets and saying, listen, if one of these ideologies is wrong, the other one will survive, right? Like whatever. Because, so I don't know what's going to happen, but I think Bitcoin is a powerful win on the side of freedom and privacy. And because it wrests control of money from that class, the banking class, whatever the hell you want to call it, and puts it back into the hands of anybody who's willing to just engage it with a little bit of effort.
Yeah. Mike, did you have a thought on that? Or jump in?
I mean, effort is important. It's not as easy as going to open a bank account. There's a lot of education you have to teach yourself. There's a lot of stuff you got to read. You got a lot of podcasts you got to listen to if you want to get your head around Bitcoin. But once you do, you freed yourself from that fiat system in at least one small way. But I think that way is a meaningful way.
Mm. Yeah, agreed. Totally agreed. In saying that, I want to kind of loop back to this in a second, but in saying that, I was going to ask you this earlier, because this is something that, I mean, I see it in YouTube comments, I'll get, whatever, hundreds of comments, and there'll be like 5 of them. They're like, well, the CIA created Bitcoin, the NSA did, and blah, 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 blah. And so it's this thing we keep having to come back to your guys' point. I mean, it's probably gonna be something you continue to deal with for years into the future. But what is your, seeing many angles, being in for as long as you guys have, but also seeing many angles of the system inside and out, what do you say to people, or what are your thoughts just on, whether they did or they didn't, or does it matter if it was them or not? So how do you guys kind of approach this?
I don't think it matters who did it, right? It's out there. I think that, Satoshi is a lot more like Shakespeare than any kind of agency with a master plan, because the truth is that master plans are hard to execute, right? Master plans rarely have this much success. And the success of Bitcoin, I think, could be attributed to the power of its communities. I think that much like Shakespeare, I don't think Satoshi was one specific individual. I think that it was maybe a group of developers or something. Just like people say Shakespeare was maybe a group of writers who are all working towards the same common goal. I think it's more likely to be something like that than a master plan executed by the federal government. Because if you take a look even at this case, the amount of times the federal government was wrong or couldn't even, find something simple or misrepresented something, I don't think they'd be capable. I don't have enough faith in their ability to launch a master plan like Bitcoin, So that's my perspective on it, at least.
Yeah, I mean, the CIA is usually just involved in a lot of failures. So I would second, Mike on that. And also, really, first of all, I don't think it matters. I mean, it's kind of an interesting question, right? But where's your proof? Like, if the CIA is doing it, then I would assume the CIA is doing it to exercise some kind of control over us, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Where do you see any empirical evidence of the CIA or anyone exercising any control through the use of Bitcoin? What I see, rather, is the government trying to stop people from using it, and big banking interests backing the government in doing that, and trying to raise this fear and hysteria that only criminals use Bitcoin and only terrorists use it. And, oh my God, Hamas is using Bitcoin. Like, no, man.
You use it to buy coffees and book hotel rooms and flights.
Right.
Any purchase you can do online, you can do it with Bitcoin.
Right.
Yeah. You use it to buy goods and services.
Exactly.
Paul Krugman doesn't understand that.
No.
Anyhow.
Paul's got cash in his wallet, and he doesn't realize that's what's used most for illegal activities. He's still operating
exactly,
in
right. What Paul is buying his Coke with is cash.
He's buying his fax machine and his exactly. He's living in the 80s and 90s. So we were just talking about, and I think you're right, Tor, too, and Michael, you kind of touched on this too. People want control. Some don't want to be controlled. It's just this fight of society, and it never will end. And that's kind of what I'm stuck on as well. It's just, I kind of call it more good versus evil. Like evil never goes away. I think like the problem with good people, which I believe all people are created good, is that some are incepted by some other entities, and they allow themselves to kind of, lower their humility. They get a little bit too big ego, and they think they need to control their people. Long story short. And a lot of people fight back against this. But I think the problem is a lot of good people that are currently in their good state, in their right mind, they just think, oh, we've got one win. Oh, we've got a Bitcoin, or we win a court case, or something happens. Because I've seen this just being politically, like even as a kid, like 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And good people walk away. They're like, cool, awesome, game over, we won. And then evil's like, oh, this is great. Like the good people went away. Now I have no one fighting against me. And this is like this common theme, the life cycles of society, you could almost call it the fourth turning, where we just do these dumb things every cycle because we walk away, think we've won. And then we turn around, go back to our lives because good people have lives. And then, oh, by the way, this was, the nature abhors vacuum, and what you left is now being taken over again. And it's just thousands of years recorded history, the same thing happening over and over again. So wild. If so, in saying all this, if the regulators keep tightening the net, what happens to Bitcoin's fundamental promise of self-sovereignty as they continue to try to cinch down on things? What's the most important legal or practical step everyday Bitcoiners should take today to protect themselves?
Oh, that's a tough question.
That is a good question. Use Bitcoin.
I would
use Bitcoin and use Bitcoin openly and honestly. If you're getting Uber Eats with put your credit card in there, try to figure out if you can use Bitcoin on that app. If you're gonna pay for something on Amazon, try to use Bitcoin. And I know those platforms don't necessarily have it, but use ones that do. Use ones that support the community, because the more we can normalize Bitcoin and make it a part of our day-to-day life, the more people who use it, it'll probably go up. More people want it, and everybody's better off. So just using it and participating in it is a huge step forward.
And normalize privacy, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're talking with somebody and they say, well, why do I need that privacy? I'm not doing anything wrong. I've got nothing to hide. Just look at them and just say, you trust the government? Yeah. And if they say yes, well then, maybe you want to reconsider your friends. Because, or, maybe not, but you can't, like this naive faith in government. I guess you either have it or you don't, right? And I just have read way too much history, and I don't even think you need to read that much history to see that there's a million reasons not to trust the government. And I'll point to a historical document again that we've been talking about on this show, the Bill of Rights, right? That is a reaction to an abusive authoritarian government prying into everyone's lives and seizing stuff that belongs to those people, right? The story hasn't changed, right?
Yeah. And one of the last founding documents that I don't think we touched on today, we might have, but the Declaration, which the last line is one of my favorites of, we'll pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And it's good people banding together again. And I'm pretty hell bent on the fact that I think it's going to be a couple percent of people, which means we still have a ways to go. And we're probably not even 1%, right? Globally, of people actually grokking what's going on and using Bitcoin. So we got a couple percent to go, and that couple percent akin to the American Revolution are going to drag the rest of society through this process. So, I just appreciate you guys sharing all this stuff. It's so important. We did talk earlier too about like a lot of like the freezing of accounts. I would love your guys' thoughts on what's going on, just, before we kind of, wrap here and get some final thoughts. The FDIC a couple of years ago is that viral video that that went out to them, like at a roundtable saying like, hey, the public has a bunch of trust in the banking system, unlike us. They're like laughing about it, yucking it up. It's from like 2022. And they're talking about bail-ins. Obviously, things going on in Europe. just issues galore, freezing of accounts, locking things down, bail-ins, whatever, bailouts. I mean, all kinds of craziness. What are your guys' thoughts just on some of that tangentially related to, what you guys do and do actually? I mean, that is what you do, but also we talked a lot about Roman's case, but just that world that we're in right now, where again, we've talked about Bitcoin, the solution, the things you're dealing with and what you litigate for and try to defend people. But I would love some thoughts on just like where we're at in this, kind of bringing this all together, where we're at in the game right now and how you see things shaking out here.
I think when you see, like the debanking and, the freezing of the accounts, you're really seeing the corruption of the regulatory state and an abuse of state police power for ideological purposes, which is entirely improper for the administrative state to engage in under the theories that it's claiming authority under in the first place to regulate people like there's some sort of enlightened administrator. Mike and I know a bunch of people who got debanked, and when I first heard some of these stories, I was like, wow, that's really, really hardcore, because these are successful, members of the business community that are not criminals. Their only crime is that they made a bunch of money because they worked really hard and then got into Bitcoin. But we knew, the what's her name? She's one of the founders of the Bitcoin conference. All her banks debanked her because she was running the Bitcoin conference, right? And she's this wonderful, your next door neighbor, and you're she's not Chavez or whatever, and that was, they just the government got this. I mean, we see it in other computer cases. There's this superstition about computers or anything technological that is not easy to understand, and it invokes, I think, this part of people it's the same part that gets scared by witches. And so they get into this kind of weird psychology where there's this voodoo technology that invokes this primal fear. It's really weird, but it's in almost all our cases, and it causes them to kind of lose their minds and just attack it. And that's what I think you're seeing going on with the debanking and the freezing of the accounts.
Yeah, it's terrible. And you mentioned the truckers' protests. Up in Canada right now, there's 4 huge bills that are going through on their second reading in Parliament, and they present a threat to everything we've been talking about today. They're big ones, and they're going to shape the world, and particularly the UK, Canada, and Australia seem to be moving in this direction towards a Huxleyan Big Brother kind of environment. Anyways, Bill C2, Bill C12, Bill C8, and Bill C9. And those 4 statutes that could make their way through the second reading in Canada, would provide the federal government to have lawful access, is how the terminology that they use, lawful access to any communications or digital information, meaning that they can look at all of your data without a warrant. So that one's particularly dangerous. Then you have BC12, which is expanding FinTrack and different AML requirements. Bill C8 is the one that's dealing with telecom access and making it so that the major telecom companies in Canada have to turn over information to the government if requested. And then Bill C9 has been expanding interpretation of what hate speech is, which is basically lowering the threshold of what is determined to be hate speech to encompass anything that is against the government's prerogatives, right? So those 4 bills are really, really threatening in Canada, and it looks like the Carney government's trying to push that stuff through. Former chief of the Bank of England, who's our prime minister right now. But taking a look over the border, it doesn't look very good. Things are a little better in the United States than they are in the rest of the Anglosphere. But the U.S. is going down the same path, and they're forging their own path. But we got to fight back. We got to fight back against these developments, and we can fight back with the law, because the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the ethos of these documents is not trust the government and hand over all your data. So we do have the legal high ground to be able to argue some of this stuff, and that's what we do on a regular basis.
What and again, it's not that I want you guys to have more competition out there, but who else is out there doing what you guys do? I mean, it just feels, again, and that's the Bitcoin world. You're pioneering things are happening. So there's a lot of times it's just like you, right? It's just like you said earlier, Tor, it's a Wild West. a lot of things we do are the Wild West, the last 16 years. So, are there more people needed to take up cases and fight against, stuff like advocacy, like, is it Bitcoin Policy Institute? Like what, like, again, buy Bitcoin, defund the system, self-custody, stuff like that. Amazing. That's what the average person can do. But like at higher levels, how do you continue fighting?
I think there is a lot of really good people out there in different spaces. I think if you're a young lawyer looking to go into a field of law that's exciting, ever expanding, really challenging, and is not settled like, say, real property or contract law is, computer law is the way to go. It's a growth industry. Technology's not going away anytime soon. And one of the things I like about it is that it's a new body of law, and it's very rare in the law for a new body to emerge. And you just by historical accident, you could be at the front end of the development of this body of law and affect it potentially for a long, long, long time. And that is fun, right? Like, despite all the crazy pain and trauma we're seeing, which is hard, right? Like, but I do, you gotta look, sometimes it's a silver lining. I feel privileged to be in this spot. I think there's plenty of room for other people in it. And I think there's a lot of great, people in it, like in just fighting in all sorts of different corners. And we just run into them all over. Because it's not just lawyers. It's just, you just got to normalize this stuff, normalize privacy, talk about it with your family and friends. All politics is local, right? And just normalize the narrative here, because it's not this criminal thing, and privacy is completely normal, right?
And talk about what happened to Roman.
Yeah.
If Roman, it's terrible what happened. And one of the reasons there's not a ton of people doing this kind of work, even though there's a lot of interesting stuff to do in it, is because the government seizes the money before the clients can even talk to the lawyers. Yeah. Like with Roman's case, we knew he was innocent. We really wanted to rep him. We did everything we could to fund the case. And, both Tor and I were going on our last dollars trying to fund the case. And we're grateful to the Bitcoin community that stepped in to support Roman.
The community stepped up.
We could do what we were doing. That freed us up and allowed us to defend Roman best we could, and we're continuing to do so on appeal.
Wow. Yeah, that really helped. Yeah.
So thank you again to the Bitcoin community for that. Yeah, totally. But when people get indicted and they get their assets frozen, they can't hire a lawyer for the most part.
Wild.
A lot of private counsel is going to turn them down. So they're at a huge disadvantage once the government seizes their funds, freezes their bank accounts, or takes their crypto wallets.
Again, which is why most people just plead guilty even if they're innocent. It's not worth it.
Is that something? Is it always been like that? Like your assets always got freeze? I mean, I feel like that's a newer.
Yeah, it's relatively new. Like on that level where they just come in and wholesale grab it. Civil asset forfeiture, they grab it. You haven't even been found guilty of anything. And then they just get to keep it. And they use it to fund their own agencies. Again, you see they're a weird kind of profit motive to create crime. Oh yeah, I can go seize $2 million from this guy and keep it. All I have to do is accuse him of a crime, and I don't even have to get a guilty verdict before I take all the damn money.
I mean, it's where the Bitcoin now that they have, right? Isn't that how the United States has the Bitcoin they have now? It is. So
that's what they didn't sell.
Yeah.
They didn't sell, right? But I mean, that's an argument for, hiding your keys and like not like even letting anybody know about certain addresses, like whatever.
Right.
They can't. That's, that was part of their whole thing with Roman's case. They were like, yes, we know there's no real evidence against him, but he was so good at hiding stuff. Like
they were bringing in all kinds of stuff too. They brought in stuff about his, he had a system in his apartment for when he was, he was a bit of a digital nomad, go live in Spain for a couple of months. And he had plants in his apartment in Gothenburg, and he wanted to keep the plants alive. So he had like a Tor server that he was accessing in order to time the watering.
A remote planet watering system. Yeah.
To take care of his plants, and the government came in and brought all this information in and made it sound evil.
Like he was him operating Bitcoin fog, and it was his plant watering system, right? They never introduced the Bitcoin fog servers, ledgers, logs.
But they did introduce a server that he used for a VPN service he was trying to set up. He didn't really do anything on it, yet it was still blanked out. It all had zeros on it. Nothing had been written on the server blade. But the government introduced that and saying that, oh, it must have been wiped. The genius creator of Bitcoin Fog must have wiped his server before. And you know what? The worst part and the saddest part was that the jury bought it. The jury bought that.
Yeah, it's not.
And we introduced evidence to the contrary through our guys, and they ended up going with the government on that one. You know, we're really hopeful that we can get Roman out on appeal. You know,
I was going to say,
we have made a lot of really strong arguments on that.
Yeah. So where does that, Tor, I know you're about to say something. Where is that? What's the status right now currently of everything?
Was it like December 15th? So we submitted our opening brief. And going back to our discussions about rationality, that's on appeal, I think you do have a chance being rational, right? Like, because appellate courts, they're removed from all the bullshit in the trial court, and they always sit back and they're reading the papers and they're thinking about it calmly and rationally. So I want to dial back a little bit what I said about rationality never mattering.
Right.
Again, the appellate courts are an exception. But we filed our opening brief, and then the opposition brief from the government's December 15th, I think, or something.
Yeah,
like
they took one look at our brief and filed a request for an extension to respond. So they were supposed
it's kind of blame them. It's
to respond on
it's
October 15th, and now it's going to be December. I think December 15th. Then we'll have a reply brief, which is a fun one to write.
Yeah, and then in January, and then it's so much stuff. We had to ask for an oversized brief from the court. Wow. Like, it was double. They gave us double the normal word limit. So I don't blame the government for asking for more space. But and we could have written easily 5 times that with raising issues. It's a very, really interesting. No matter what, it's an interesting case. Like, I think it's a really important case.
Yeah.
Usually on appeal, you're going in depth into like maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 issues. This case had like over a dozen. We cut it down to a dozen.
Yeah, it was really hard to whittle them down. Like strong ones, not like ones that are like, normally a lot of times when you do these appeals, you're like, what am I going to do? Like, okay, yeah, right. Like, I'm going to reach for it with this issue because I used kind of a good faith thing. This was like, wow. Why is it in Washington, D.C. when nothing happened in D.C.?
I was going to ask you about location.
Why was... Yeah, that's the whole venue issue. So nothing happened in D.C.
That's wild. That is wild. It's, again, it just feels like that's some of these revelations all of a sudden over the years of, or new revelations of, the civil asset forfeiture. Like, beforehand, it's like, I don't think that we were founded this way. I don't think that's how things used to work, guys. Like, we're to move into jurisdiction of things. It's like, that's not how things work. So where does that, like, where did that all go wrong? Is it just people like how do you, like, if the government just does something arbitrarily, again, it's like if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around to hear it, does it happen? So if no one does anything, like, how do you stop the government from, like, Brandon can't just show up and be like, hey, guys, you can't move this random case that I have know nothing about. You can't move that. It's supposed to be in another jurisdiction. Like, how do you fight against that?
That's a great question. I think you're seeing in the United States right now, you're seeing a reaction to that expansion of the administrative police state in Trump winning the election, the felon beating the prosecutor. I think part, not the only thing, but part of what drove that was this reaction to the police state. I think that's why Bitcoin sided with Trump.
Yeah.
I think the left had an opportunity to back, join sides with Bitcoin, and all they did was attack it, thinking that Bitcoin was weak, and then finding out, Bitcoin's not some little backwater thing anymore. It's going to donate $200 million to your opponent, you idiots. But I don't, that's been a slow progression in the United States. I think when you start out, you've got this, you still have a tension between this desire for a big federal government and a limited government. That's always been a tension, but where it first really changes is with Reconstruction after the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and the formation of DOJ is to enforce these Reconstruction statutes. Then it really starts to accelerate in the 20th century with the New Deal and FDR trying to save capitalism, whether or not he was responsible for saving it or not, whatever. I leave that for other people to debate. But as part of that, he institutes this massive expansion of the law and removes all these common law standards that were sort of limitations on how you could interpret the law, and like you remove actual reliance on the fraud from all the fraud statutes. So you no longer have to show that anybody was actually defrauded to prosecute them for fraud. And they do that all over the place, and then they put in these like sort of philosopher king bureaucrats under the theory that they're smarter than the stupid common man who needs to be protected from his own idiocy. And you've got I think, a recipe for administrative abuse. And now I think with Trump, you see the reaction to that, because he's dismantling everything.
Yeah.
Like left and right, and the left is screaming bloody murder, like not understanding that they actually created Trump.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great point.
And going after Bitcoin so hard was a huge shift in that.
Huge mistake.
You know, the Libertarian Party allied with the Republicans, you know, took all their Bitcoin funding and sent it their way. And, you know, the Libertarian Party is doing some great stuff these days with their relationship with the Trump administration. And we're hopeful that, you know, should this appeal not go in the right direction, that there's a possibility that Roman could get pardoned from this administration. We've been trying to network with the right people, get his story out as much as we can, because anyone who gets to know the case, everybody reaches the same conclusion. And that's utmost sympathy for Roman's situation and an understanding that he's totally innocent of this.
Wow.
Yeah, and this administration is very good for Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I don't worry about this administration with Bitcoin as much as what happens in the next election. And that's what you need to be ready for if you're in this space in the United States. And frankly, I think that's a reason like the United States has kind of lagged in the Bitcoin economy. It's why New York is a digital currency backwater, because we've got something called BitLicense that the, you know, idiots in Albany decided to come up with. And, you know, people are always like, New York's a financial capital. I'm like, it used to be before BitLicense, right? But like what they don't see is like they're trying to say, oh, we're going to protect you in the interest of whatever economic efficiency or whatever, when they're the ones actually hampering it, when they're inhibiting economic development out of their fear, irrational fear of something they don't understand. And because they don't understand it, they're like, oh, it's you only used by criminals. No, that's not true. What I think is more true is you're just ignorant, right?
There's a lot of opportunity for traditional finance to work with Bitcoin. You know, I've seen this in multiple different areas. A lot of the institutions, especially here in New York, have chosen not to go that route. And you're watching the rise of a financial capital in Miami. And I think a lot of that has to do that Florida and the laws in Miami are more favorable towards Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's an incredible talk, guys. I mean, I could go for hours talking about so many different avenues with you guys. What and final thoughts from you guys? You know, anything we missed, anything like that at all? And where can people find you? You know, Michael, you want to start it off?
Yeah, sure. You can find us, Tor Ekeland Law, PLLC, www.torekeland.com. We also have a website set up to support freeing Roman. It's called www.freeroman.org. Donations can be made directly to us through the website or on the freeroman.org website. You know, just we're trying to get this story out there as much as we can. Roman personally is just a wonderful guy. He's just salt of the earth, really gentle soul. And he's in an extremely tough environment for something he didn't do. And he's looking at a lot more years behind bars. And we got to get him out of there.
Tor.
Privacy is normal. Privacy is a human right. If you don't think you need privacy from criminals or the government, I ask you to reconsider that and consider the fact that maybe you're being a little bit naive about the environment that you're actually operating in. And free Roman, man, free Roman, because he's an innocent man in jail. And whatever you can do to change the narrative, whether it's at a picnic, at a game, or water cooler conversation, take that opportunity to normalize Bitcoin and normalize privacy, because that's really how real change is instituted, in these small steps, not on these grand, colossal stages.
So well said. Mr. Michael Hazard, Tor Ekeland, thank you, gentlemen, so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
If you like that episode, then you're going to love the playlist we put together for you with our most recent podcast with the top Bitcoiners, sound money, liberty advocates in the world. Go check those out here. We'll see you inside. You're going to love them.